Welcome, everybody. My name is Keith Long. I work with Ironworks Consulting. Today we're going to go through upgrading the different ways we can upgrade to SharePoint 2010. Just to give you a little background on who we are and who I am before we jump into it. I work with Ironworks Consulting. We started in about 2001. We now have somewhere around 200 and, well, this slide's a little old, we're around 280 people. We have offices in Richmond, Washington, D.C., Raleigh, Charlotte, Atlanta, and Minneapolis. We have industry focus around healthcare, government, not-for-profit, financial services, and we do, generally we position ourselves as a project-based consulting company. We focus primarily in the enterprise content management and portal space, although we have large practices in business intelligence, project management. We develop PMOs. And one of the things we like to talk about that separates ourselves, especially from a SharePoint perspective, is our interactive user design group. And so they do a lot of the creative design work and usability and things like that that sit on top of SharePoint and help make the SharePoint environment look really pretty, something I personally am not very good at. From a differentiator perspective, we tend to hire senior resources. We have long-term clients and really our look for results, and that's really what drives us from day to day. My background is fairly straightforward. I've been in the industry for about 15 years doing a variety of different things. I worked as a trainer for a while. I've been doing software development in one flavor or another for pretty much the entire time. Most of it started with VB and some of the really early versions of it. Lately, mostly doing C# development and things like that. As more recently, I tend to focus more on the architecture and design side of larger implementations. I've been with Ironworks for about 8 years, so kind of know how this organization works, and I head up the Microsoft practice here. So I get to see a lot of the different implementations, and from an upgrade perspective, which is what we'll be talking about today, I've been able to see how that process works from SharePoint 2001 all the way through today with 2010. And certainly Microsoft has made some good strides in improving that process. Anybody that's done it in 2001 knows it wasn't exactly the cleanest process. Not to mention upgrading to 2007 was pretty ugly, in my opinion. We do a lot of work, and I've got some background with SharePoint in terms of integrating with line of business systems, commerce server, reporting services, and all the other pieces of the Microsoft stack, as well as a lot of third-party things. And from an upgrade perspective, that can certainly play a role in how you want to look at performing your upgrade and what some of the challenges might be there. So with that, I think I'll dive right into what we're going to cover today and just give you a quick overview of the agenda. One of the things we want to do is a very brief coverage of SharePoint 2010. You'll recognize the slide. I won't spend much time because I'm assuming if anybody is looking at upgrading to 2010, they kind of know what SharePoint is, but we'll throw it up there for a second. We want to talk about some of the benefits of upgrading, why we want to go through this process. Some organizations are thinking about just standing it up side by side and foregoing the upgrade and slowly sort of migrating content over by hand. There's certainly an option to be done there, but there are benefits of just doing an upgrade as well. So we want to talk about some of those things. We want to take a quick look at the upgrade process itself and some of the things that you want to consider. Mostly from a planning perspective, there's a lot to be done there, and really from my perspective, planning is probably one of the biggest things you can do, and knowing what to be aware of during that planning process can really save you a lot of time on the back end when it comes time to actually do that upgrade. So we want to take a little time and look at what our current infrastructure looks like, making sure we're ready on that front. We want to look at the different resources that you as an internal organization might need to have available, whether it's from a governance perspective or other things. Making sure people think about training and all the other things that go with getting your people ready for that upgrade, training and all that sort of thing of end users as well as content owners. The impact of the upgrade. Some of your systems may break, some of your custom code may have problems, things like that. We then want to take a brief look and walk through the upgrade checklist and see what's going on there and how Microsoft has sort of tried to put in place some tools that help make sure you don't start the upgrade before your system is ready. One of the big problems a lot of people have is they just give that upgrade a shot and then it breaks and now they're in worse shape than they were before. And then the last two things we're going to take a quick look at will be what an upgrade from 2007 to 2010 looks like, and some of the challenges there and things we can do to sort of make that process a little bit more seamless. And then, of course, the one that hopefully not too many of you are looking at, but we'll talk about for a few minutes, is upgrading from 2003. And this is an area Microsoft has not spent a whole lot of time improving upon, but it's certainly something that we've seen a few of our clients have to go through, and we ourselves are actually in the process of upgrading an 03 farm all the way to 2010. So I've got some experience there, and we'll talk about all that. So as I mentioned, we've got our brief overview here, and 2010 is pretty much the standard thing. Hopefully you've seen the wheel before, or at least understand the concept. Really, Microsoft has put a lot of investment in changing the way the platform works, and in my opinion, really turning it into a platform that supports a lot of the content management collaboration capabilities from the site's perspective, the communities, and the content, but also on the other side where we're looking at search, they've incorporated FAST, and that can play a role in your upgrade process. Business intelligence, which they're now calling insights, all the different services that now play into that role, as well as composites, where we look at how we integrate back-end applications, whether it's through REST or ATOM or SS or the business connectivity services. So this is sort of the new platform that we're looking at, and hopefully it's driving why you would do that upgrade. So one of the things that I think we try to look at is why you would want to do the upgrade. Obviously, there are a lot of new features in 2010, but I think one of the biggest things that we look at is really around the metadata. And a lot of people that have been using SharePoint 2007 or even if you're on 2003 really are not able to leverage a lot of what have become standard content management features from a metadata perspective. And SharePoint calls it site columns, content types. We have taxonomy, we have term stores, all those types of things in 2010. This type of data that's only available in 2010, in the structure that it's available through publish subscribe models and much more robust taxonomies that we can target to individual users, really if you go to 2010, now we can make it a lot easier for users to find their content and get access to it, whether it's through dynamic navigation or through search functionality. But that type of capability is something that an upgrade really only affords. And so organizations that are thinking maybe we want to simply leave 2007 in place and stand up a new environment with 2010, they oftentimes will lose a lot of the ability to find that content, even if they take search in 2010 and point it back to that old repository. And that certainly is a good way to get to that legacy content, but if you can bring it into the new system, start tagging it, it'll be much more findable, provide more relevant information for their users, and is a great benefit if you can do that. So it really can provide a lot of benefit, and it's worth the effort to do the upgrade. So it looks like a couple people may not be able to hear me. All right, and apparently we're okay now. So sorry for that. The other thing that I look at, and this is more from my background doing a lot of system architecture work, is that a lot of times people, when they stood up 2007, they did the standard approach where they went out, just installed it on a single server, started using it, it caught on really quickly, and it just ballooned into a heavily used system that maybe they didn't plan for quite correctly. And that's not through any fault of their own. It's just when you open up a platform on a single server or two, it expands out very quickly, and it's hard to sort of go back and revisit the architecture in terms of how you laid out the services for search, the shared service provider. Maybe you had to do some integration. Well, upgrading to 2010 instead of leaving that in place is a really good way to start looking at that architecture and going out and saying, hey, now's the time to fix these things, and let's do it right and make sure we do that. The other big thing, obviously, is Microsoft is going to start ending their support for those platforms. So it's a good time to start doing that at the beginning of a life cycle there. So hopefully that gives a framework for why we want to do it. Let's take a look at how we do it. And this slide is more of just a sub-agenda, if you will. This is the process you will typically go through. And so what we're going to do throughout this webcast is just talk through some of these and make sure we're highlighting some best practices, some of the things to watch out for, and really the best way to do this so that you can be successful at the end and minimize the downtime in the environment, and just be aware of some of the things you want to plan for and maybe take proactive steps for. Really quickly, identifying the current state, running through the planning steps that you want to do. And those two are just looking at what your organization is currently doing. Are we on 2007? Do we already have 64-bit architectures in place, things like that? We want to, from a planning perspective, look at the different services that we're currently using. So if we're using Excel services in 2007, we want to understand what we've done there from our data sources, all those types of things, because depending on how we do the upgrade, we'll have to handle that in a different way in 2010 to make sure that we move the data sources, the spreadsheets that we've got, any different things. If you've got info path out there, all the forms need to be migrated. We want to make sure we're aware of each one of those and we set it up properly. All of this stuff is really just the planning so that we know some of the background steps that we need to take before we get to the upgrade checks. I tend to like to look at the upgrade checks as a last step. Microsoft sort of says, hey, this is a quick way to get started and see where all your gaps are. I'd rather take the step of do a bunch of that planning that I know I need to do and run those checks, and hopefully there aren't that many that we have to fix at that point. Once we're there and we get all the green lights from the upgrade check, we can go on to the upgrade and go through that. And once the upgrade is successful, now we've got to look at the creative design, upgrading our master pages, and all those fun things. So that's kind of the high-level process we're going to follow, and we'll go through that. So from a current state perspective, what are the things that we want to consider? One thing is the software. SharePoint 2007 in particular, we want to make sure we've got it to the most current version. And just as a sort of a back side note here, if you're running 2003, Microsoft doesn't provide a direct path from 2003 to 2010. You've got to go from 2003 to 2007 as an interim step. So really most of the stuff I'm going to talk about here is really around 2007 because you've got to pass through. Towards the end of the presentation, we'll talk briefly about some of those gotchas that you want to look at from a 2003 perspective. One big thing that we want to do with 2007 is make sure we've got Service Pack 2 and cumulative updates installed as currently as we can. The one that really is important is in October of 2009, they actually updated how the upgrade checks work. And really what's going on here is they're checking to make sure that SharePoint hasn't been extended in any way that would prevent the upgrade from working. They're making sure that you haven't modified the database, that all of your WSPs and deployed components are sort of handled the right way so that when they run the in-place upgrade or even a database upgrade, you won't have any problems and it won't break your upgrade. So that's a fairly important one to make sure you're running the right version of the upgrade checking tool. It's also just a good way to make sure your environment is up to date and all of the APIs are the same and things like that. I would also recommend sort of going from a hardware perspective and getting your systems already up on 64-bit OS. It's not a requirement, but if you want to do an in-place upgrade, you have to. If you're going to do a database upgrade, you can install new servers next to your 2007. They can be on 64-bit OS, and you're going to copy and paste those databases over. If you do a hybrid approach, again, if you're going to do it directly on those servers themselves have to be 64-bit, so we can go from there. We want to look at resources, and so this is the other big one, and I know this is all about upgrading and things like that, but a lot of organizations will sometimes get really ahead of themselves and just start thinking about the technology and the platform and things like that. You want to make sure that you remember to think about communicating with the rest of the organization at large. Make sure we train our users, not just the administrators who have to manage 2010, but also the end users. The user interface for 2010 is considerably different. We've got a lot of new screens and capabilities and things like that, so we want to make sure they're up to speed on how it works, what their capabilities are, if they're adding new content, whatever it might be. The other thing that I look at in particular is really around the developers. If you've got an out-of-the-box SharePoint 2007, it's probably not a big deal, but most times when you're thinking about an upgraded 2010, it's because you've got it in place, it's been there for a while, you've got a lot of content, a lot of functionality that you've developed over time, and you want to leverage that going forward. It's at that point that looking at those custom features you've developed, the solutions you've deployed, you really want to make sure you're aware of what you're going to have to do to change it and get that compliant with 2010. In this case, you're going to want to make sure your developers are trained, that they've got time to support this. We want to have those features recompiled and ready to go for 2010 prior to the upgrade. We don't want to do the upgrade and then all of a sudden realize, oops, we now have to go recode this. That's something that we don't want to find out after the fact, especially with an in-place upgrade that, depending on how much planning you take, it would be hard to roll back. From an environment perspective, we always recommend having a staging environment. This is just a really safe way of being able to run through that upgrade multiple times if you need to and see if things work. So for the larger environments with custom development, things like that, we're generally recommending going with a database migration. It gives you a little more flexibility and lets you try it out. Certainly there are other ways to do in-place. If you've got a VMware environment, you can just snapshot that over, do your in-place upgrades 3 or 4 times, make sure you get it right. But in either case, having a staging environment is a great way to sort of make sure you've given yourself the best chance of success without impacting your end users. So prepare and plan. We've talked about some of these, but I'll just go through them again. We want to look at training, governance, compliance, business value planning, adoption, any other elements that are critical to the upgrade strategy. The thing that I think is particularly useful is governance. With 2010, if our upgrade is successful, that's great, but 2010 has so many more features to it. The capabilities have been extended from integration to content management, metadata management, taxonomy, a lot of things from a business intelligence perspective. We have new features with Performance Point, integration with Visio services, things like that. We really want to make sure we have a good governance model in place so that as we get to this new platform, users know what are acceptable practices, acceptable use. We have good governance around quotas and content management in terms of how much space people have, notifications, things like that. As you add a lot of the social media features, you're now going to be exposing end users to the ability to communicate with each other in ways they haven't in the past, and making sure you've got moderation where you want it and allowing the free communication to flow where that's really the goal, and making sure that people can collaborate and get their work done as efficiently as possible. We also want to look at this from a larger perspective, that 2010 can bring other people in and really sort of recognize that it's not just the technology. You want the business users involved. It is a bigger framework, so we want to make sure we're careful and cognizant of that. One way to help do this, and this gets back to some of the technology, is really to look at the worksheets that Microsoft plans. We've tweaked these ourselves a little bit. Everybody's going to be a little different in terms of what they're looking for. Usually the tweaks that we do are designed around the features and scope that people are looking to implement. We've got a link here. You can download this entire presentation afterwards and get to it. It's part of the TechNet site. It's pretty straightforward. There are 4 or 5 different spreadsheets, lots of different tabs within it. But really, they walk you through each one of the services, all the content migration strategies that you might want to look at, all the features and services that you've got implemented, and make sure you're looking at that. There's also just a general SharePoint 2010 planning resources, but they've got a lot of worksheets that can be beneficial there as well. So once we've got that in place and we've sort of thought through the schedule and the planning, and we figured out who's going to be involved and everything else, one of the other things that we sort of backed up, and it may seem a little out of order, and I know we haven't given you all the details of what the different options are, but I really want people to look at identifying the different services that they're running and being aware of how our current environment is working, as well as with 2010. Planning this out is fairly critical to the success of the upgrade. So I think it's worth pulling out, and I've got a couple slides coming up here that are going to walk through a few of the more critical ones, but search is particularly challenging, and so we call that out. We'll talk about that in a second here. The business data catalog, again, it's got a lot of issues with it. If you've built several different applications to talk to your back-end systems, depending on how you do your upgrade, you'll need to do a lot of manual migration there. You need to reconfigure and build out the BCS. Those applications can be exported and imported, but unless you do an in-place upgrade, they're not all going to work. And even in that case, depending on how you've made those connections with your SSO provider and things like that, you may have to do some tweaking to really get those working right. Profiles in my sites, again, there's some work you're going to have to do with some commands and things like that. So each one of these, you really want to use those worksheets or some type of a tracking module of your own to make sure you're aware of all the different pieces and parts. And this is sort of an inventory is the way I look at it, to make sure you've got everything in place so that when you run that upgrade, you can test it out and make sure all the functionality that all those users who may not realize they're using it, or when you went and talked to them and said, hey, are you doing this or that, they may not remember it, but this is how you can make sure you've covered all your bases. So let's take a quick look at some of the shared services that are out there, and search is one of the big ones, but we've got two major types of upgrades that we will typically do. There's also the hybrid approach, which for larger environments is pretty common. But if we look at the in-place upgrade, this is sort of the simplest approach, and if you can do it, I think it's a very good approach. One of the things that's nice about it is that it's going to go ahead and create a proxy service for each one of the shared service provider applications that you got. So if you had Excel services, form services, things like that, it's going to go ahead and migrate them. Your profiles, your My Site, all those types of things are going to be migrated. Individual databases are automatically created for you, and the content will continue to reside right where it was. So they do that upgrade for you. It really solves, or saves, I should say, a lot of time for you as the administrator and the migration manager in terms of making sure everything is in place for you. It certainly has some drawbacks in that if something goes wrong during that upgrade, your environment is down. We typically counter that by saying, let's do it, if we can, through a VM, snapshot it and test it out several times, and then we do it live. That's one way to go. Make sure everything is in place. The other option is using a database attach, and we'll get into this in a little bit more detail later on, but when we do this, one of the things we have to do is we can bring the personalization information with the profile and the My Sites. That stuff can be upgraded because there's a database attached with it, but a lot of other pieces and parts with the search components, the metadata, the taxonomy, info path, all of the forms that you've got to manually migrate those pieces and parts from 2003 over to 2010. The BDC, you're going to have to do that by hand. Excel services, not only do we have to turn on and configure the services, but we've got to bring any custom data, trusted data sources, all the Excel files that you've moved, those will have to come. Certainly if they're living inside of a content repository, they'll come with you, but if you store them as part of the application, custom calculations and things like that are part of that Excel services backend, you'll have to export and re-import them into 2010. So from a search perspective, one of the things we want to be careful of is just thinking through all the different pieces and parts that exist within SharePoint 2007 search and what ends up happening in 2010. The settings from search are not maintained if we do a database migration itself. So you're going to have to go through and grab all the metadata, all the managed search data. Each one of those are going to have to be reconfigured. So you really want to take the time and document everything you've got in 2007 and make sure you have a way to bring that over to 2010. We've written scripts to do it. There are APIs available both on 2007 and 2010 to do that. There's no consistent process provided by Microsoft to do this, so whatever works well for you, we've tried scripting it out, and it works pretty well depending on the types of customizations you've done. So that's one big thing to do. The other option would be to look at doing a hybrid approach, and I think there's some value here with a hybrid approach, because in the hybrid approach, we're going to detach our databases. So if we've got 4 or 5 content databases, we detach those, we do an in-place upgrade of the shared service provider, central admin, and all those parts, which will retain all of our search settings, all of our content sources, all of that information, and then we reattach the content databases, and it starts to upgrade those in place. That solves a couple of things. One, it retains all your information, but it also allows you to upgrade multiple content databases simultaneously, which makes that a little bit more efficient. A couple other things just to keep in mind. If in 2007 you'll have had a single shared service provider for search, now it's going to create a search service application for each shared service provider. So in the future, you have the ability to have more than one, and this is really something that you want to think about as you move forward from a broader architectural perspective. You may want to break that up into multiple search applications to support different use cases and things like that. The crawler in 2010 has the ability to be configured in a lot of different ways, and you can go even one step further and go to fast. So you may, if you've got the enterprise version of 2010, you may want to actually drop the out-of-the-box search functionality, stand up fast, and really reconfigure how you're doing search entirely. and that's a much broader conversation. So at a high level, that's kind of some of the features and things to consider. If you can do the hybrid approach, I think that works well if you have a very complex search or user profiles to watch out for, which is some of the other features that we want to look at. Again, in place is really the way to go here. I think what we have found is for the larger organizations that have multiple content repositories, the hybrid approach is the way to go. Using a database attach is a good approach, but you've got to make sure you document what you have. Most organizations are going to detach their databases because of one of two things. The amount of content that they have is in multiple repositories, and it would take too long and they can't support the downtime, or because they're really in a situation where they need to try it out in a different environment, and it's just going to take too long. So a couple of different reasons for doing that. Most of the time, we've also seen another need is because people want to look at reconfiguring it. They want a different use case for their My Sites, different data is coming in for their profiles. They're trying to use BCS, SSO, search, all these different features may have been handled a little differently in the past, and they want to re-architect their solution. From there. Oops, there we go. Once we get all of our planning done, we've documented all of that information, we want to start looking at the upgrade checklist. At this point, we're going to go through and run the upgrade checklist. It's a command prompt. It's a PowerShell tool. It's going to go against 2007. It's available once you've got Service Pack 2 available. One of the things that we've run into a couple times, which is a little surprising to us, is that people are modifying the database in 2007. And you really want to make sure that you don't touch the database in 2007 or 2010. There's typically enough of an API available or a service layer that you can do what you need to do without modifying the database. If you have touched the database, the pre-upgrade check is going to stop you and tell you that the upgrade is going to fail, and chances are good that it will fail. It's going to go through, check all the files. It's going to look at the servers, the databases, the alternate access maps, site definitions, features, web parts, event receivers, all of those different things. So it goes down to a fairly low level to make sure that each one of those are in place and correctly coded and are not causing any problems. If you've written any camel queries, things like that that may have problems, maybe nobody's used it in a while, it's throwing some errors. If it's a severe enough error, it could actually throw a flag on the upgrade check and prevent you from being successful with an upgrade. It also is going to take a look at the database itself. Each one of the content databases are going to be verified. It's going to sort of check to make sure that you haven't touched it, but it's also going to make sure that you've got the current version and it's consistent, especially if you have two different content databases. If you've run cumulative updates and you've only done it for WSS 3.0 and you didn't run it for the farm, things like that are going to be verified to make sure all the versions are correct. And there were obviously, back in 2007, there were a number of problems where people got into incorrect versions and things like that. So they're really making sure that you've crossed all your T's, dotted all your I's, and make sure that everything's in place. The other thing that we've seen that's really useful here is just from an API perspective. If you've got custom web parts, things like that, if you have touched those event receivers, you've made some changes to an HTTP handler or module, things like that, it can sometimes flag those and become something that you want to be aware of so that you make sure you resolve it before we go through the upgrade itself. At this point, we want to do the upgrade. And one thing we haven't really talked about is the visual part of it. So we look at three different versions of the upgrade. There's the in-place upgrade, which is pretty straightforward and hopefully at this point is making sense to everybody and fairly straightforward. It's going to be on that existing server and walk you through it, and we'll take a look at that in a little more detail in a second. Database attach mode is going to let us take that existing 2007 farm, leave it where it is, stand up a new environment, go into SQL, detach those databases, copy them over, and bring them up into the new environment that we have. SharePoint in the background will then start upgrading each one of those databases until they're complete and ready and bring them back online, and now that new farm can display that content. The last one is the hybrid, where we do it for a couple of reasons, but really in my mind the biggest one is that you've either got a lot of content databases or you have a lot of custom configuration to your profile or shared service providers. and that allows you to sort of upgrade that shared service provider, attach the databases, bring in databases from other farms, and bring it together. There's some other sort of hybrid versions that are out there, but they're less common and usually restricted to a specific scenario. The last thing that you want to do after all of this happens is you want to do a visual upgrade. In my mind, this is actually something that needs to start fairly early, but it's the last thing you're going to do in the actual upgrade process. And at this point, if you've done the upgrade, it's going to continue to look like 2007. So the look and feel, even if you've customized it, will remain in place. And all of the hooks for 2007 are still there. So 2010 is in the background, all the API, all the services are there, all the modules and everything else, but it's going to still look like 2003. It's going to function like 2003. You then can tell it to let's do the visual upgrade, and it's going to swap out your master pages, your page layout, and bring those up to a 2010 version. You want to have everything in place at this point where you can deploy your custom look and feel for those master pages, page layouts, so that you retain the look and feel and everything is the way you want it to be. So let's take a quick look at in place. I think I may have covered a few of these, but obviously the pro is it's done all at once. It's relatively easy. I tend to throw a little bit of a warning flag on that one. It is easy if you have a fairly straightforward environment. If you haven't made any significant customizations, integration, things like that, it is very easy, and it's the simplest approach because you don't have to touch a lot of the back-end systems. Most settings are preserved for you. You can resume the upgrade if something goes wrong. So a lot of times, I shouldn't say a lot, but sometimes you'll run into something that didn't quite work. It stays where it is, and it's really good about making sure that it doesn't corrupt the environment. It just stops, allows you some time to go and fix it, resume that upgrade from where you are, and you move forward from there. Obviously, there's some drawbacks to this approach. There is no rollback. We manage this by simply using VM scenarios and things like that. Whatever your favorite replication model for a system is, that's a great way to give yourself at least a trial and error to make sure that it's going to work. It takes the longest amount of time, so it is relatively slow. It's got a lot of work to do, and depending on how large your content database is, this can take several days to actually perform an upgrade. It does have problems. The upgrade check doesn't capture everything, so we do need to sort of be aware of that and make sure that we've got time, and so we set a service window. This can be a problem. So if your users need to have access to it 24/7, and you need to have a 2-day window to do the upgrade, that might work on the weekends, but if people need access, it's going to be offline during that time period. So the biggest tip here is just make sure you do backups. You can roll it back. I personally would go with the VM route. It's a great way to do it. It's simplified. Microsoft supports it. You can do it on VMware. Take your pick. It's just the easiest way to snapshot that environment, give yourself a way back if you need it. Database upgrade. I really like this because it's a lot safer. It gives us the option. It tends to be faster because SharePoint in the background will spin up multiple threads to upgrade each one of the databases in parallel. It doesn't require downtime. It can be done in a separate parallel farm, so your current users accessing the current site, they can still read that content. It's going to lock it so that they aren't making changes, but at least they can access that content and do what they need to do while you're doing the upgrade. And then you can use DNS to just redirect people or IP changes, however you want to handle that. But that way, from a site perspective, you're not down really from a functional perspective. Negative drawbacks, it only upgrades the content. You've got to reconfigure that environment. Like we talked about earlier, you've got to hit all those services. There's a lot of stuff you're going to have to manually migrate, things like that. For complicated environments, this is definitely a drawback, but it also affords you a lot of flexibility in how you bring those things back online. It lets you plan. You can fix things that have been in conflict in the past that you need to upgrade and fix going forward. A couple other things to think about with the database upgrade. You're going to need to move a lot of the files from the 12 Hive over to the 14 Hive. So these are things like custom lists and libraries and site templates and things like that. You've got to move those manually to make sure that they get to that target environment, and we've got everything in place so that when the upgrade is complete, all of that functionality is still there. Your site, when it moves the content database, is going to look for those features, the GUIDs associated with them. If they're not on the file system on each one of those front-end servers, it's not going to function properly, and you're going to get a bunch of errors. Users won't know that until they hit the site. So if you look at the diagram, we've kind of laid out a couple of different steps. We typically will bring it offline as we do that, move it over. Each one of the databases gets brought online. Keep in mind that shared service provider database does not get upgraded. You've got to do that yourself manually, and that really becomes sort of the crux of the issue. Obviously, it provides a lot of benefit, but it's also the risk that we run. From a hybrid perspective, this is really nice. I think it's one of the more ideal scenarios for larger organizations. You can upgrade multiple databases in parallel. So as we bring those users offline to upgrade the databases, we may have, like in the diagram, 3 or 4 databases there. We can move all of them over. It allows us to in-place upgrade all of the shared service provider information. In this case, we're going to have downtime during that upgrade. So we bring that content database offline so that we can do the shared service provider upgrade, bring that on, get all those upgrades to the services, keep all that existing configuration data in place, which is really beneficial. Problem is, during that time, the site is going to be down. But the secondary benefit is we can then bring on those 3 or 4 content databases. They'll be upgraded in parallel. And so overall, this should reduce the overall time frame as opposed to if we had done an in-place upgrade for this one farm, which also would retain the configurations. But because you have 3 or 4 databases, it's going to be a lot faster if we can do them in parallel like that. Once we get through that, we want to look at the visual upgrade. So we want to sort of go from the out-of-the-box image on the top right, which is the 2007 look, to the 2010 look. If you customize it, you can run this upgrade. We still want to run it even if we're going to customize it because it's going to get all of those, all the look and feel in place, all of the master pages, all the style sheets, everything else is going to be dialed in for us. It does run in a separate process, so each site gets upgraded one at a time. It allows you that flexibility. It's also going to upgrade the back-end administrator sites. You've got some options here for how to do it. One of the nice things is you can sort of do it in steps, and you can look at a preview, so you can see what it's going to look like in 2010 and make some decisions about whether or not you're ready to do that. And then you can finalize it and move to 2010 at that point. Before we do the visual upgrade, you've got these options through Site Actions, pretty straightforward things. We can take a look at those. Visual upgrade, it's going to give you the preview and lets you navigate around the site and take a look at what each one of those pages is going to look like. A couple other things that are going to pop up for you that are useful to note. As you're going through that, the site settings, we can set that to preview. Only the people that have permissions to see this are going to be able to see that. So that's a nice way of sort of looking through that site to make sure it is what you want. It's essentially loading both sets of modules. It'll swap the appropriate master page, the 2010 master page, versus the current 2007 master page in and out so that you get to see the right one. Your current users still see the 2007 one while you're preparing the upgraded master pages. And at that point, this is what it should look like. If you've customized it, it's obviously going to look the way you've designed it to look, but that's really what you're going to be dealing with. In order to upgrade those master pages, a couple of things that we want to look at is content placeholder controls. They're a little bit different in 2010. You want to make sure you've upgraded those appropriately. There's a new server ribbon. A lot of people struggle with this. You want to make sure you've touched on it, cleaned it up with your new master pages so that users get all that functionality. A lot of controls that were included with the default master page have moved into the ribbon, so people that have customized it and moved it around, you're going to have overlapping controls. You want to make sure you're cleaning that up in your new page layout, the master page, to make sure that it's all going to function properly. You can use the UI version 4 attributes to make sure that you can see what they look like. And then all your custom master pages, like we've talked about, need to be upgraded as well. A couple other things that we want to look at. Migrating users and permissions. This is one of the bigger issues that's out there, especially if you've been using Anonymous or if you're going to move to a claims-based authentication module. Forms-based authentication doesn't really exist in the same way that it did before. We're now using claims-based authentication. So you're going to have to rebuild that regardless of how we do this. So there's definitely some work to be done to make sure that happens. You want to go into web config, make some changes there, and essentially verify that people are going to have access, whether they're anonymous or through their authentication provider, if it's Active Directory or wherever that actual source really lives. So a couple of other things before we start wrapping up here in a few minutes. Things that won't get upgraded for you. If you've written custom site definitions, you need to go through and rewrite these. It's not a huge amount of work, but it definitely, depending on what you've done, it may be, depending on the functionality you've put in there, either as part of the deployment events or as part of the definitions themselves. Same thing is true of site templates, list definitions, list views, field types. So if you've written a bunch of custom field controls, those will have to be rewritten to support 2010, make sure they're not going to have any problems. Custom workflow actions. With 2010, we've added a lot of new functionality from a workflow perspective. It's a different workflow engine under the hood, so we need to rewrite those if you've written custom actions or activities. All of the files in 12 high are not deployed, so you need to move those manually into the 14 Hive in 2010, especially with the database attached module. The other thing that can run into, that people can run into that is a problem here is if you've written your code for 32-bit architecture, you want to make sure you rewrite all of your code so that it's compiled down to 64-bit. Otherwise, it may not run properly. So. And this is just sort of a list of a few different commands that are useful. We found them particularly beneficial as we go through our upgrades. We talked about a couple of these, testing the content database, making sure it's ready for the upgrade, mount the content database as part of the actual upgrade itself. It's going to give you a way to go out and start it when you're doing that database attach in the second step. Upgrading the content database is how you actually kick it off. Upgrade the search is going to run that for you. The SSO provider as you upgrade that, and then importing the info path administrator files. So as you do a database attach, you need to grab all those info path files, bring them over. This is how we can move those from 2007 to 2010. And then the profile management metadata property, this is one of those features that is really nice, especially from a user perspective, making sure that we bring all that metadata that was customized in 2007 over to 2010 when we're doing a detach and upgrade and getting all that configured in 2010. So, the fun one, when we go from 2003 to 2010, this is going to require a number of different steps. You've obviously got to prepare for the upgrade. You want to run the pre-scan upgrade tool that we did from 2003 to 2007, make sure that that's in place. We want to get a temporary farm that's running 2007, make sure that that's ready for us so that we have a place to bring that 2003 content into 2007. The first step is to do all of our planning activities, and then we want to move all that content into 2007. We want to make sure we can do this quickly because there's going to be some downtime here. So, again, having that staging environment is really key to making sure we're successful here. After we do that, we want to go from 2000 to 2010. One of the nice things here is that most people that are coming from 2003, there's not a lot of customization, or the customization that was there really wouldn't apply to 2010. And so really we can look at just bringing the content. A lot of the functionality people wrote really, again, wouldn't apply. And so as you do that inventory in 2003, you're probably going to be able to check off the list and say, we don't really need to do most of these things. And so at that point, when you get into 2007, it's a fairly straightforward upgrade to 2010. We typically still will recommend doing a database attach just because the 2007 farm that we have is temporary and probably isn't sized appropriately for the 2010 farm. And so it's really just a way to move those content databases one at a time over to the new farm. So that's kind of the high-level process there. And at that point, we've got a couple of different tools that might be useful for people to consider as they're doing an upgrade to 2010. Quest has some really good migration tools to help deal with it. Exceller as well has a DaVinci tool. Both of them are designed to move content, bring a lot of the service-based data as well as the content data. And all of these tools really are really good at helping identify the metadata, the taxonomy, all the other things, and giving you sort of a little bit more than just making sure you upgrade your site in place, but allowing you to go out and assign new metadata values to your content. Things like that point will help out with permissions. So there are a number of different tools out there depending on the scenario you're looking for. We've kind of used each one of these at different points in time depending on the particular scenario that we're dealing with, and they can provide a lot of value. A couple of different things just to highlight, and we'll get to any questions that we have. We've got 2 blogs, a fit and finish blog, which is really about look and feel, creative design. It's our user experience group, publishes that content. And under the hood is more of the technology thing, where we talk about some of the detailed code and upgrade challenges and specific solutions we've developed. And Scott and the rest of the team are great contributors to that site. If you've got further questions after we go through the Q&A, you can always reach out to me, klong@ironworks.com, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And with that, I think we'll see what type of questions Scott has gathered.
All right. Yeah, we've got a few questions that have come in here, Keith. We'll start out. One person asked if I do not have many customizations in my environment and I'm using mostly out-of-the-box site definitions, which upgrade approach would you recommend?
So they've got mostly out-of-the-box site definitions. Is that what you said?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. Depending on the size of the site, I think you can probably get away with an in-place upgrade. I think it'll depend on a few other features, but if you haven't really customized the site and list definitions, an in-place upgrade should work for you.
All right. Another one, when you say that custom list views and field types will not be upgraded, do you just mean the list views and field types have been made by a developer or users?
So we're looking at custom XSLTs for the list views and CAML markup. Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah. They're asking about custom list views. Is it the stuff that's made by the custom list views that are created by the developer or by the user?
Yeah, those are not going to be upgraded. They'll still render okay, but you're going to want to rewrite them so that it works better from a long-term perspective.
Okay. And let's see what else we got. So another one, we've made some changes to our list forms, such as display form and edit form. Will they work after the upgrade?
Sure. If you've done an in-place upgrade, the form should work. It depends what you've done to those forms. If they're info path forms, you may have to do some tweaking there. But if it's pretty straightforward, you should be okay in an in-place upgrade. If you've done a database migration and you've got custom definitions on those forms, then yeah, you're going to have to rewrite them. Depends exactly how you modified those forms.
All right, and I've got one more. Asked, how has the object model changed with SharePoint 2010 compared to MOS 2007? How much trouble should we expect while upgrading our custom controls and web parts to work with SharePoint 2010? I can field this one if you'd like. We've done a lot of work on our side in upgrading some of our controls that we've developed, and most things upgrade pretty well. For the most part, most of the object model is still there. Not many things have been deprecated. It's more an extension of what was there with 2007. So, you're gonna want to take the time and get your web parts and those things upgraded into Visual Studio 2010, because there's a lot of benefits that you'll get from Visual Studio 2010. You're going to get a lot better debugging capability and compiling capability. So you want to take the time and upgrade your projects, but a lot of your code, for the most part, should be there. You're going to want to recompile it, like Keith mentioned, into a 64-bit target.
One of the nice things they did was leave most of the API in place. They've started identifying a lot of methods as soon to be deprecated, but they're still there. So that's the nice thing, but that's, in my mind, that's really a warning shot to say you need to start looking at upgrading them.
All right. That's all the questions that we've had come in.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time and look forward to hearing from you. Good luck with your upgrades.